Today at the National Press Club, leader of the Australian Greens, Adam Bandt. Heading towards a federal election, he'll lay out his party's plan to fight corporate greed and build a better Australia. Adam Bandt with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia for today's Westpac address. My name is David Crowe and I'm the Chief Political Correspondent at the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age of Melbourne and a Director here at the club. Our guest today is Adam Bandt, the leader of the Australian Greens and the member for Melbourne since 2010. That makes him a 14-year veteran of federal parliament, someone who's seen some very close elections in his time and one hung parliament. Adam Bandt entered Parliament after working as a lawyer in Melbourne for many years, including about a decade at Slater and Gordon. And he has a PhD in legal theory. That could be very good preparation for him to comment about a High Court challenge to the appointment of an administrator to the CFMEU, one of the topics we might get a few questions about today. His address today is about the Greens' plan for the future, including $514 billion in new federal revenue over a decade, from a company tax increase that he says will fund the services that Australians need. So there's a lot to hear about and also a lot to ask about. Please join me in welcoming Adam Bandt to the podium.
Thanks very much, David. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners, pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge my parliamentary colleague Shane and Emma here from the ACT, and thank you everyone for coming along. People are drowning. If you're worried about the cost of rent, mortgages or food, you're not alone. Despite working harder and harder, the cost of living keeps rising and millions of people are falling further and further behind. Since Labor came to power in 2022, the cost of food is up by 10.5%, rents have gone up by 31%, and the average mortgage payment has gone up by $1,667 a month. Power bills are up, insurance costs are up, health and education costs are up, and wages are not keeping up. There's now more than 3 million people living in poverty. People who are struggling to keep their head above water are going under, pushed down by billionaires and big corporations that make massive profits, which are driving up inflation in the economy and the prices of things that everyone needs. Oxfam found that between 2020 and 2023, the wealth of the 47 richest billionaires increased by 70%. Since 2020, the wealth of the 3 richest people in this country has gone up 50%. This is cool comfort to many of those who have shivered through one of the coldest winters in recent memory in parts of the country, driven by a heat wave over Antarctica, forced to choose between heating their homes or eating, while others now, right now as we're here today, are facing 35 to 42 degree days in northern Australia in August and are struggling to stay cool. While others struggle to pay the rent, the big 4 banks made a record $32.5 billion in the 2023 financial year. Since the pandemic, big corporations and billionaires have been making bigger profits, increasing at a faster rate than at any time in history. While people went backwards, the biggest 500 corporations made $98 billion in crisis profits off the back of the pandemic. Woolworths, Hancock Prospecting and NAB alone reaped billions of dollars in crisis profits. Coles and Woolworths have both increased their profits too, as anyone who's been to the supermarket can tell you, pocketing billions off the back of higher prices that just keep going up. Up, up, profits are up. There's no food shortage. Australia exports most of the food we grow and make here, but farmers and suppliers are being squeezed too. It's price gouging, profiteering, ripping people off. It's immoral, but under Labor, it's lawful. Big corporations are making massive profits and driving the cost of living crisis. The economy is rigged. It's been rigged by politicians from both Labor and the Liberals. It's not some natural occurrence that has rerouted the economy away from the wages of working people and into the profits of big corporations. It's been rigged by design. Right now, the share of income going to big corporations in the form of profits has never been higher, but wages are back to 2010 levels. People are angry, and they're right to be. Millions of people are being robbed, fleeced and plundered by big corporations and billionaires in a heist facilitated and enabled by the politicians from Labor and the Liberals. You're being ripped off at the supermarket, ripped off on your power bill and ripped off on your mortgage. Alan Fells held an inquiry into price gouging and found that people are paying too much, too often for the basics that they need in life. He cited submissions like those from Danielle, a nurse whose bills rose over $8,700 over 2023, while her wages only increased by $102. These big corporations, reaping profits off these high prices, are paying millions in donations to Labor and Liberals, and Labor and Liberals are writing laws to benefit them. We need to confront reality. The power of big corporations to push up prices at our expense is driving up everyone's cost of living. Governments have the power to do something about it, but they're choosing not to. Labor and the Liberals will not tackle the real problems that we all face. Instead, they're refusing to act or tinkering around the edges, handing out a few $100s here and there, trying to paper over the fault lines. But politics needs to do more than that. It needs to address the pressures that are causing the cracks in the first place. It needs to make life better for people. Since Labor has come to power, things have gotten a lot worse. But mark my words, we wouldn't be in a better economic place now if the Liberals were still in. They would also let big corporations gouge people. We can't keep voting for the same two parties and expecting a different result. Labor has lost themselves. People tell us that it's harder and harder to tell Labor and the Liberals apart. They've betrayed everyday people by refusing to take on the big corporations' excessive profits. While people are being ripped off by the big supermarkets, the Prime Minister was just a few weeks ago posing for photos in a Coles high-vis vest. It's a level of disconnection with the realities of everyday people that everyday people are facing that echoes Scott Morrison. Not only have Labor refused to take on the big corporations and billionaires, they can't even bring themselves to point out the role that big corporations have played in causing the cost of living crisis. Earlier this year, the Greens ran a Senate inquiry into the price gouging of the major supermarkets. We found significant evidence of price gouging and the pain that this was causing people. We recommended new laws to give the government the power to break up the big two supermarkets when they were abusing their market power. A pretty standard antitrust approach when there's one or two big corporations with too much market power. An approach that the United States has had for years. However, according to the Prime Minister, such an approach was akin to Soviet Russia. And in response, he said, we have a private sector economy. He got a Labor mate to do his own independent review, which recommended a few tinkering changes to codes of conduct, and voila, nothing changed. Groceries are still getting more expensive. We need a government who is prepared to take on the big supermarkets and deliver cheaper groceries. But instead, we have an economy, as the Prime Minister has said, which is run or rigged for the private sector or for big corporations. Under Labor, the economy is not run for people. It's not run to ensure that everyone can eat or have a roof over their heads or stay warm in winter. It's not run for students piling up debt, working multiple jobs to pay more and more rent. It's not run for the young families trying to work out how they're going to be able to afford increasing childcare fees. It's not run for people who want a safer climate. It's not run for the people on income support who are being forced to jump through humiliating hoops by job network providers to claim a pittance. And it's not run for the older women who are one bit of bad luck away from sleeping in their car. This is an economy which is run for the profits of big corporations and billionaires. Look at Labor's approach to the cost of living crisis since coming to power. Labor is using everyday people as cannon fodder in the fight against inflation, leaving all the heavy lifting to the RBA. Instead of taking on the big corporations causing the crisis, Labor believes that by letting interest rates go up, the economy slows down and down comes inflation. But the result has been billions in profits for the big banks and an incredible amount of pain for renters and mortgage holders. Labor's attempted to wash their hands of the actions of the RBA, but make no mistake, this pain that people were feeling was part of Labor's plan. Labor had a different choice. They could have adopted the Greens' three-point plan to tackle soaring inflation and the cost of living crisis. Make the big corporations' price gouging illegal and put price caps on out-of-control costs like rents. Tax the excessive profits of the big corporations and invest that money in things that people actually need, like wiping student debt, affordable housing, expanding Medicare to include mental and dental health. But that would have taken guts, leadership. But as soon as something looks hard, Labor gives up and fails to act. Instead of tackling the cause of the crisis, the greed of the billionaires and big corporations, Labor has whacked everyday people with higher rents, higher mortgages, higher food prices, higher power prices and more costs to see the doctor. To try and buy the public off, they've given people a few $100s here and there, which have been gobbled up by increasing costs. What good is $200 off your energy bill when your rent has increased by hundreds a week or your mortgage payment has doubled? It doesn't even touch the sides. Labor has let people down. The problem is, big corporations do not pay their fair share of tax. Despite billions in revenue, 1 in 3 big corporations does not pay tax. And when it comes to coal and gas corporations, almost 2 in every 3 big corporations pays no tax. The system is rigged. Danielle, the nurse from Alan Fell's price gouging inquiry, is paying more tax than an international gas corporation. Not just one gas corporation, 33 of them. She's also paying more tax than 21 coal companies. She's paying more tax than Exxon, Santos, Virgin or Amcor. When a nurse pays more tax than a multinational, something is deeply wrong. Together, in the 10 years between 2014 and 2024, all the teachers in the country together paid twice as much tax as the entire oil and gas sector. Big corporations treat paying tax like a discretionary item. The ATO has described some big gas corporations as systemic non-payers of tax. Big gas corporations are parasitic leeches. They suck out gas, public subsidies and profits, leaving nothing but dangerous pollution and a degraded host. Sending revenue offshore and paying little, if any, tax, the gas corporations take our gas and leave very few benefits while destroying our climate and our environment. The big gas corporations rip off local gas users, households and businesses, charging international gas prices, all while consistently making up lies about a domestic gas shortage if they aren't allowed to frack whatever aquifer they want. How do they get away with it? They pay off politicians from Liberal and Labor with massive donations, undermining politics. The way the gas corporations operate, it seems like no one in this country is even shocked anymore. No one was shocked when the Resources Minister posed with Woodside Chief Meg O'Neill at the Midwinter Ball. No one is shocked to see Labor trample the rights of First Nations communities to push ahead with the Beetaloo Basin. Just as no one seems shocked when we see the PM posing in a Rio Tinto mining shirt. But it's a slap in the face to people who are struggling to keep their head above water. Labor, like the Liberals, is now a fully owned subsidiary of the coal and gas corporations. That's why Labor has approved 23 coal and gas projects since coming to power in the middle of a climate crisis. Housing is rigged too. The rental and housing crisis is breaking people. Across the country, millions of renters and mortgage holders are being ripped off. According to a survey by housing advocacy group Everybody's Home, 3 out of 5 people are in housing stress, paying more than 30% of their income in housing costs. For renters, it's 3/4. Housing here is amongst the most expensive in the world, and the fastest growing group of people who are becoming homeless in this country are children. Children. More and more people are sleeping in cars. Instead of having the guts to take on the problem and solve it, Labor and the Liberals are making the problem worse. They're turbocharging the increasing cost of housing by handing $176 billion in tax handouts to wealthy property investors that stop renters buying their first home. Pushing up prices, rigging the housing auctions in favour of the haves against the have-nots. Renters and first home buyers don't stand a chance. And because Labor's backing the RBA to lift interest rates, they're driving mortgage holders to the wall. We need a rent freeze, and we won't stop fighting for a rent freeze and rent caps. We've consistently been seeking to push Labor to actually tackle the crisis. But Labor can't even use the words housing crisis or rental crisis, so it's hard to know how they're going to tackle a problem that they can't even say. They say that they can't work with the states to implement a cap on rents and a rent freeze, even though they worked with the states to cap electricity bills. A rent freeze will work for people who are at risk of being evicted because their wages won't cover another $100 a week in rent. We've called for a public housing developer so that we can start building homes for people, not luxury apartments for profit. According to Labor, cheaper housing is not their job. A rent freeze is not their job. More public housing is not their job. A public developer is not their job. The Greens believe that ensuring that everyone has a home is the government's job. We can't keep relying on the developers and big corporations because they are ripping us off. At the next election, increasingly, voters will see the Greens as the party of renters, the party of first home buyers, and the party of mortgage holders. People are losing confidence in the political class because they keep saying, the political class keeps saying, that tackling these important issues that we all face isn't their job. Whether it's cost of living, the climate, or the housing crisis, people want the government to step up and deal with the structural issues which affect us all. People want outcomes that will actually make their life better, and they deserve it. Labor might want to blame the problem on things that they pretend are outside their control, and the Liberals might want to try and blame things that they find threatening, like immigration, but people see through it. It's clear that it's corporate profit that is winning the day. The government has the power to tackle the issues that we all face, they're just choosing not to. Government has the power to make price gouging illegal, to make the big corporations pay their fair share of tax, to stop new coal and gas, to freeze rents, to wipe student debts, to expand Medicare to mental and dental care, and just get on with building more public housing. Labor's hands are not tied. Instead, they've chosen a system in which millions of people are below the poverty line and millions more are sinking towards it. Poverty is a political choice. The problem is the political class. Labor and the Liberals have backed a system of government in which public assets are sold off to private interests, corporate taxes have been slashed, and billions of dollars of your money, is going to big corporations and wealthy property investors instead of the people who actually need it. They complain about a lack of engagement in politics, and they wave their hands about threats to democracy. But when there are thousands of people protesting every weekend for months against a genocide, which Labor and the Liberals have not done anything to prevent, they refuse to listen. When a Labor senator actually spoke to their concerns, She was booted from the party and called a rat. The problem is not the people, it's the political class, and people are sick of it. People want the politicians to get off their arse and act. They're sick of the posing in corporate clobber, the performative antagonism on Brekkie TV and the mealy-mouthed posing. They're sick of politicians who tell us that this is as good as it gets or to simply be more civil. People are angry. They are hurting. They don't want more civility. They need outcomes. They want change. They want someone to get into government and actually fight for them. It was bad enough before the pandemic, but now, when people are at risk of losing their homes and are struggling to feed themselves and their families, it's really offensive. What happened to leadership? What happened to vision? What happened to actually having some moral clarity and some conviction and actually solving the problems that people are facing? It's increasingly clear to people that we can't keep voting for the same two parties and expecting a different result. Enough is enough. It's time to make the big corporations and billionaires pay their fair share of tax. This election, the Greens will propose a package of Robin Hood reforms. The aim is simple: to make the big corporations and billionaires pay their fair share of tax to make life better for everyone. Today, I can announce the first of these Robin Hood reforms. We're calling it a big corporations tax, and it has a number of components. The first component is targeted at big corporations who are making excessive profits beyond a normal return to shareholders. It will apply to companies with an annual turnover of over $100 million, taxing the excess profits that these companies make. This new big corporations tax would apply to both Australian corporations and multinational corporations operating in Australia. Over the next decade, this component of the tax is expected to raise $296 billion. It will provide huge amounts of much-needed funding to redirect to everyday people, and it will reduce the cost of living. Two other components are the big corporations tax on the excessive profits of coal and other mining industries, and significant reform to the existing gas tax, the PRRT, so that it actually raises revenue. The last time the country tried to seriously tax the excess profits in the mining industry, these companies poured millions of dollars into advertising, forcing Labor to sack their own democratically elected Prime Minister. That doesn't mean that it was the wrong thing to do. That is exactly why it needs to be done. We can't have the mining industry determining who and who isn't running this country and who the country is run for. If Labor hadn't capitulated so spectacularly, the country would have had an extra $35 billion in revenue between 2012 and 2020. This money could have built homes, fixed teeth, or kept people out of poverty. But instead, it's been hoarded by mining corporations, hidden in offshore havens, and handed off to CEOs in mega bonuses. Big corporations across the economy have squeezed hundreds of billions of dollars out of the public since the end of the pandemic, and too much of it tax-free. Because just one of the things that we could do through a Robin Hood-style big corporations tax is to put dental into Medicare for everybody, because your teeth should be included as basic health care. Today, I also announce our policy to bring dental into Medicare and expand access to dental care for all. When the Greens were in balance of power in 2010, we secured free dental care for children. As a result, more than 43 million services have been provided to more than 3 million children. Now, as we head towards another shared power parliament, the Greens want to finish the job and get dental into Medicare for everyone. If you have a Medicare card, you should be able to go to the doctor, to go to the dentist, just like you go to the doctor, and use your Medicare card. It's critical that we expand Medicare so it covers everything for everyone, and that includes your mouth. As anyone who's ever had a toothache knows, dental care isn't optional. It's ridiculous that this doesn't already exist. We know that over 60% of Australians have delayed dental care in the last year, and the most common reason was cost at 63%. And that's a 12% increase since the last survey. That delay seeking treatment impacts on people's lives. Another national survey found that almost a quarter avoid certain foods due to dental problems, and a third of people said they feel uncomfortable about their appearance because of their dental health. It doesn't have to be like this. We expect that putting dental into Medicare could save someone going for a simple checkup, clean and an X-ray up to $182 on a single visit. For someone getting more complex procedures on multiple teeth, they could easily save hundreds or thousands from ensuring that we put dental into Medicare. Those savings add up. We estimate that for two pensioners, they could benefit by up to $1,800 in the first year and up to $20,000 over a decade. For a family of 2 adults and 2 children, we think the savings could be even higher, at up to $2,600 in the first year and up to $29,000 over a decade. This would be meaningful change that would make a difference to people's lives. I'd like to acknowledge the work of our health spokesperson, Jordan Steele-John, and his team for leading a comprehensive Senate inquiry into how to get dental into Medicare, and for working with experts in the field to develop this important plan that I'm releasing today. It's far more important that everyone in this country has access to dental care than it is that big corporations are able to make billions of dollars of profits that they send offshore tax-free. Labor likes to take credit for Medicare, but after 40 years, they still haven't put the money where your mouth is by expanding Medicare to include dental care. We're not going to stop pushing them until they do. The Greens will make the big corporations pay more tax so that you can fix your teeth. Things have got to change. Every election, the major party's share of the vote declines. People tell us that for them it's getting harder and harder to tell Labor and the Liberals apart. Confidence in shared power parliaments is rising because they make things happen. Just this week, for example, because of the Greens sharing power, we delivered on a right to disconnect for millions of workers, especially women. At the last election, we saw more Greens and independents elected to the lower house. There's now a record number of members of parliament who aren't from one of the major parties. This is a good thing. But despite that, the political class still doesn't get it. They have mistaken a lack of interest in their own political project, self-serving major party politics, as being evidence of lack of engagement in politics full stop. People are also frustrated with traditional and social media. It's largely controlled by a bunch of white billionaires and the news is very often depressing. There's a lot of things in the world right now that are pretty hard to take in. Whether it's the fact that over 21,000 children have been murdered or separated from their families in Gaza. Whether it's the greatest levels of disparity between extreme wealth and extreme poverty that we can see. Or whether it's the world hurtling past 1.5 degrees of warming, driving an Antarctic heat wave or the boiling of the Great Barrier Reef. People know the system is rigged. And in the face of this, we're seeing an increasing desire from the political and CEO class to blame those who are sick of this rigged system and who want something better in their lives. They tell them to sit down and shut up, get richer parents, work harder, or they imply that they don't understand. People are written off as woke, unrealistic, populist, or even threatening the fabric of our society. This is the political establishment trying to defend a status quo that is no longer viable. Their main strategy is to crush people's hope, to tell them that nothing more can be done other than the weak Band-Aid answers that they're dishing out. Well, it's not working. Today, young people and people of colour are leading the world's biggest movement for peace. The movement fighting against the genocide in Gaza for a free Palestine is dominated by young people and people of colour. This war has radicalised a generation who've been unable to avoid the horrors on their phone of an area 40 kilometres long and 7 kilometres wide being bombed into smithereens. The major parties also hate the climate movement so much that they're throwing peaceful protesters in jail. Our coal and gas exports cause more damage to the world than any other country bar Russia. But instead of being concerned by the big corporations making billions burning up our future, they're locking up the people who are prepared to get in the way. But the climate movement still grows. There is also a growing movement fighting for control of rents to bring down the costs of housing for all, a movement fighting for mental and dental care for all, a movement fighting for free university, TAFE, and to wipe all student debt, a movement fighting for raising income support so that no one in this wealthy country of ours lives in poverty, a movement to make price gouging from the banks, supermarkets and power corporations illegal to bring down the cost of essentials for us all, a movement for publicly owned renewable energy and an end to more coal and gas, a movement for peace, a movement for equality of all, a movement for treaty and truth. It's time to reject politics as usual. It's rigged. We need a new politics which puts people first and which tackles the big problems that we face. And this isn't just a dream. Currently, the Greens hold balance of power in the Senate. This election, we will be running the biggest campaigns in Green history to win lower house seats too. There are at least 5 new seats across the country where we believe we're in with a strong chance. In one of them, if only 300 people change their vote, the Greens could win the seat. We are confident that we can continue to hold our ground and grow, and we will be in a strong position to fight for change in the next parliament. We know that there are millions of voters on our side, and among voters under the age of 34 years old, the Greens are now neck and neck with Liberals and Labor. Voters increasingly see the Greens as a party able to represent their material interests as well as their values. Across the country and the world, we face a series of profound interrelated crises, serious systemic issues. They cannot be solved by giving people a few $100s once a year. They will not be solved by the 2 major parties. People can see things are getting worse. People can feel themselves going backwards. They're rapidly losing confidence in the ability of the political class to do anything about it, but mark my words, they are deeply, deeply political. We will not let the major parties crush our hope. Here's the message that you're going to hear us repeating until election day. We can't keep voting for the same 2 parties and expecting something to change. We know that change might not happen overnight, but nothing changes if nothing changes. If you want change, the first step is to actually vote for someone who will fight for it. If you want change, you have to vote for it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Bandt. And before we go to some questions from the journalists here, I'll kick off with one about the economic plan that you've set out, which raises or seeks to raise a lot of money. Now, in preparation for today, I had a chat to an independent economist that I have a lot of time for, Saul Eslake. He's not working for any of the vested interests in this space. He's in favour of some of these ideas, such as getting big tech to pay its fair share, or getting gas exporters to pay more in PRRT. However, he makes the point that Australia currently generates about 6.6% of GDP from company tax, which is double the OECD average. And I'm not talking percentage of tax revenue, that's percentage of economic output. So we're already collecting a fair bit. He's not saying that should be cut, but there is an economic point here. If you increase the taxes on companies across the economy, are you seriously suggesting that you will set prices in the economy so that they don't pass that extra cost directly onto consumers in the middle of a cost of living crisis?
Well, we're talking about not every corporation, we're talking about those corporations that are making excessive profits, obscene profits, windfall profits. Under our plan, corporations will still be allowed to make a profit, but we're saying if you make an obscene profit off the back of price gouging, profiteering, windfall gains, if you're making these obscene profits, in part because you control the market, then you've got to pay a fair share of tax. Now, other countries do this, and Australia doesn't. And the other statistic that I would point to is that the share of national income going to corporate profits has never been higher than it is now. So we're saying these businesses will still be able to operate, but when they're making these massive obscene profits in a cost of living crisis, they have to pay their fair share of tax on it. Now,
but you've got a dollar figure on the number that you're aiming to generate in revenue. Now, those dollars have to come from somewhere, and economic orthodoxy is that it gets passed on. Are you going to have to set prices for bread, milk, other items in the economy to stop consumers being slugged?
Well, with the supermarkets, yes, we will also push to make price gouging illegal. That is a key thing that we will do to ensure that it is not passed on. We've already announced measures to that, and there will be more to come on that front. Similarly, with the banks, watch this space. There is, though, at the moment, there's still competition in the economy. It's just that some of these big corporations have massive share. Coles and Woolworths have about 2/3 of the grocery sector in Australia. You don't see that in other countries, right? You don't see that in other countries, and as a result, they're able to price gouge. That has to end. So you bet we will have measures in place to stop the price gouging and to stop them lifting prices, because that's what this is about, bringing down prices. But the massive profits that they're making, because they control so much of the market, well, they've got to start paying tax on that. They'll still be able to make a profit. If they make these excessive profits, though, pay some of it back to the public, because that's who you're making the profit from.
Next question is from Phil Curry.
G'day, Mr. Bandt. Phil Curry from the AFR. Thanks, Crowy. I want to ask you about the CFMEU, Mr. Bandt, and the current state of affairs. Last week in Parliament, the Greens didn't back the legislation to force the CFMEU into administration, and yesterday we saw Max Chandler-May speak in support of the rally in Brisbane. It's not unusual. It's happened in the past with the ETU, and other unions have often gone to the Greens when they've become disaffected with Labor. If after this administration process is over and the CFMEU seeks not to re-affiliate with Labor, would you welcome them as a partner with the Greens?
Well, we have individual people as our members. We don't have a structure like the Labor Party where organisations or unions can affiliate. But can I just say, in a general point, we took a principled position to that piece of legislation, as we do to other pieces of legislation that come before us. We believe strongly in the rule of law and separation of powers in this country. Where there are allegations of wrongdoing, and there were some serious allegations that were made that needed to be investigated. Our point is that what we have is law enforcement agencies that are able to then gather the evidence and begin prosecutions. And the Greens have been pushing, we've been the ones pushing since the beginning for strong anti-corruption laws and an anti-corruption watchdog, so that any allegations of corruption, whether it's in a union or a corporation or against a minister, no one gets a free pass, right? The Greens have been leading the charge and have been the corruption busters in Parliament. So whenever there's an allegation, we want to see strong institutions that are able to tackle that. But we also believe very strongly that if the government wants to deviate from the usual separation of powers and take over a court case, then because there was a court case currently underway, then you've got to come up with a good reason for doing it. And we formed the view. We went to the government, raised our concerns about these rush laws that they were bringing through, unprecedented laws, what it meant for natural justice for people, why this approach was necessary rather than allowing to go through the courts. We put proposals to the government, and the government decided to go off and work with the Liberals instead, right? And that's what happened. But historically, you will have seen on this, but as well as other legislation, where Labor and Liberal, like non-union legislation, where Labor and Liberal come together to rewrite the separation of powers and the rule of laws, we've always taken a principled position on that. And I know that for Labor and the Liberals, for them everything is about money and so on, and so they always see it through that lens. It might come as a shock to them that there are people in Parliament who are going to vote on the basis of principles, and that's what we did. We looked at everything very, very seriously. We considered it. We had discussions with the government, and we came to the position that we did.
But do you think prima facie there wasn't a case for some sort of intervention, given the overwhelming amount, of anecdotal and anecdotal evidence and video evidence and so forth, and just years of testimony?
Well, again, and that's we did think there were serious allegations that were raised, and those formed the basis of a court proceeding that was underway in the Fair Work Commission. We've got provisions, in the federal court rather. We've got provisions in our laws that say where there has been misbehaviour, then courts are able to deal with it and do things like put unions into administration. Like that court case was underway, and so our point to the government was, well, you don't see many other instances where things are proceeding through the court on the basis of allegations of wrongdoing, and the government steps in and says, oh no, we've got to take that over and legislate and predetermine the court outcome. And with respect to other matters, there were court proceedings in other jurisdictions underway. So yes, we did think there was a case, and what we weren't persuaded by was that the government's approach was the right approach.
Next question is from Jacob Grieber.
Thank you, David. Adam Bandt, Jacob Grieber from the ABC. The Parliamentary Budget Office, who you engaged to do your costings on the corporate tax issue, warns that the numbers you think you'll raise was, basically a happy guess at best, because there's a lot of uncertainty around the assumptions. One of the reasons would be that global capital is incredibly mobile. Copper is available from Peru, LNG is available from Russia and Qatar, and iron ore from Africa and Brazil. What makes you so certain you'll have a resources industry to support the welfare spending you envisage?
Well, our tax is designed to still encourage investment. We're talking about excessive profits. They can still come here and make a return. We're talking about these obscene profits that they're making. Like what we're saying with the gas industry, for example, is that when there was the Russian invasion of Ukraine and it sent the price sky high, they made billions in windfall profits. The United Kingdom, the Conservative government in the United Kingdom thought, oh, well, we should tax that. And Australia didn't, right? And you have in Australia these big gas corporations, 56% of the gas they get for free. They don't even have to pay for it in the first place. Show me some other small business or any kind of business that gets all of its input costs from the government for free, right? They get the gas for free, and then they make billions of dollars profit and they send it offshore tax-free. The gas is going to remain here. It is the minerals are going to remain here. They are things that this country owns. It is time we did what other countries do and get a fair share of return and stop the profits all going overseas tax-free. I know every time that you talk about making the big corporations pay a bit more, they always squeal and say, oh, well, we'll go somewhere else. Well, I'll tell you what, people are still going to need supermarkets here. The minerals and the resources are going to stay here. They're still going to need banks here. We're just saying, pay a bit more tax when you're making these obscene profits. So I know that they say those things all the time. We've designed this to ensure that there's still continued investment. We're just saying when you make these big whacking grey profits, do what other countries do and say you've got to give a bit of it back to the public because that's who you're making the money off.
It does actually cost money to get gas out of the ground, quite a bit of money, so it's not exactly free. But you seem really confident that these businesses won't simply move elsewhere to jurisdictions where the tax regime suits them.
Well, we're still going to need supermarkets, still going to need banks. There's still money to be made out of mining, right? We're not saying you can't make a profit. We're saying you've got to pay tax on these obscene profits that you're making. And I make the point, other countries do this, and they're much better off as a result of having done it. Other countries successfully said, when we're having a mining boom, we're going to put a bit back into the public purse to invest in our country. We don't do that. Nearly 2 in 3 big coal and gas corporations pays no tax. That is not right. And when a nurse pays more tax than a multinational, something is deeply wrong. We can't keep defending a system where nearly 2 in 3 coal and gas corporations pay no tax. That is wrong. That is fundamentally wrong.
Next question is from Jack Quayle.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you, Mr. Bandt, for your address. Jack Quayle from The Australian. Turning to foreign policy, I know you briefly touched this on this in your address, but we're now nearly 11 months into the Israel-Palestine conflict. I guess I'm seeking a clarification on what the Greens' position is on a sovereign Israeli state, and how does that square with the statement from the river to the sea, given that infers for some destruction of Israel?
Our position has been crystal clear. We support the rights of self-determination for Palestinians and Israelis under international law equally. Both Palestinians and Israelis should have the equal right to live in peace and security, and for it to be a lasting peace. But this principle of international law and basic humanity that we believe in goes further. We have now seen some of the world's highest legal bodies say that the crime of apartheid is being committed. Right? The crime of apartheid is being committed. In previous instances, historically, when that has happened, the whole world has mobilised to say apartheid is wrong, it is a crime, and we need to do things about it. The international community has mobilised around that. And what we're saying very, very clearly is that no one has the right to commit apartheid or genocide. And what we support is supporting the Palestinians and Israelis to come to that just and lasting solution that's based on their rights of self-determination in accordance with international law, because for too long it's been denied. And what we're saying is simply that right that at the moment is accorded by law to one side. Well, Palestinians should have that right as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next question is from Kat Wong.
Thank you for your address today, Mr. Bandt. Housing remains obviously a very strong focus for the Greens, and with the public housing developer and rental freezes. I did want to clarify, are the aims of the Greens' policies to make housing prices go down or stop growing at such a quick rate?
Housing prices at the moment are just unaffordable, and they're especially unaffordable for first home buyers. We need to slow the growth in housing prices to give wages a chance to catch up. Otherwise, people are never going to get ahead, right? People are never, ever going to get ahead. And what we also need is government to step in and build homes that are cheaper for first home buyers to get into, so that they have a pathway into it. So it's an important question, and we believe that what's happening at the moment is that this $175 billion of tax handouts for wealthy property investors is pushing up prices out of reach of renters and first home buyers. Because what happens is a renter goes along to an auction to try and bid on a home, and they're competing against a wealthy property investor who might already have 3 homes, who knows that they've got a big fat cheque from Anthony Albanese in their pocket to push up the price out of reach of the first home buyer, right? They get a massive subsidy. So that pushes up prices out of the reach of first home buyers. That has to stop, right? That has to stop. There's better things to spend $175 billion on than giving it to wealthy property investors to push up house prices out of reach of renters and first home buyers. So in our view, if you take that money that currently Labor and Liberals are giving to wealthy property investors, then you are going to slow this crazy unsustainable growth in house prices that we're seeing. It will allow it to stabilise, to give wages a chance to catch up. And what you then also do is provide another way in for first home buyers and renters by having a public developer. That's how you make housing more affordable.
Next question is from Paul Karp.
Paul Karp from The Guardian. Thanks very much for your speech. I also wanted to ask about Labor's legislation to appoint administrators to the CFMEU, and I heard your principled objections in your answer to Phil about the separation of power and the breach of the rule of law. But it is notable that the ACTU leadership did not oppose that legislation. So I wanted to ask first, please, do you think that union members around the country were let down by the leadership of the trade union movement on that issue? And secondly, do you want to respond to Murray Watt's criticism of Max Chandler-Mather for addressing the Brisbane rally, which had Albo-Nazi placards? The suggestion seemed to be that it was inappropriate and that showed that the Greens were trying to seek political advantage from this issue.
Well, I think working people around the country have been let down by Labor and Liberal, who have chosen to work together to make life harder for people. Like we've just come out of a period of Parliament where there were a series of deals between Labor and Liberal, and I suspect you're going to see more of them as we get closer to the election. Labor and Liberal cut $14 billion out of the NDIS, rather than tax big corporations to make them pay a bit more. You're now seeing Labor and Liberal saying they might make aged care a user pays model that's more expensive. And you now also see Labor saying they won't legislate to give protections to the LGBTIQ community unless Peter Dutton agrees. On the one hand, Labor says he's the most divisive person ever, and on the other hand, they're saying we're not going to legislate unless Peter Dutton gives it the tick, right? And what we're seeing at the moment, and as a result of that, I'll come back to the question, but on this point, what that position from Labor means is this: you cannot believe a single thing Labor takes to the election because it now has an asterisk next to it. Every election policy from Labor will only be implemented if Peter Dutton agrees.
But the question was about the CFMEUs.
Yeah, I'll come back to that. But we're seeing increasingly, that's who is letting people down. In answer to your question, that is who I think is letting people down. As to Murray Watt's point, well, I'll make the point that even Anthony Albanese and Jim Chalmers, and I suspect Murray Watt, all said that this gathering was legitimate, that they expected it, that people had a right to go there and make their voices heard. So I presume that they think the rallies themselves are legitimate. On that point about the signs, that sign, the one that you referred to, is offensive, and understand that Max Chandler-Mather has also put out a statement saying that sign is offensive. That's not a sign that we did or shared or anything like that. It was a sign that someone had at a rally, but it was offensive.
Can I follow up on that? Because the stories about the CFMEU have been quite revealing, and my colleague Nick McKenzie has written today about what's emerged, and without naming names because of the legal challenges in identifying individuals, he's uncovered basically CFMEU officials taking kickbacks, freebies from big building companies. I mean, misogyny, I think, has been also covered. Union-backed firms with underworld links, ripping off workers, compromising their safety, bikie union sub-factions, taking bribes in return for a company being allowed to employ Chinese workers on big projects. This is what's been revealed, and one of your colleagues stands alongside officials and appears to support them. Isn't that going too far?
Well, no, two things. One is we've been very, very clear, and I said this in my answer before, those are serious allegations. They should be investigated, and if someone's done something wrong, no one gets a free pass. It doesn't matter that you work for a union or a corporation or you're a minister in government, no one gets a free pass. So those things that have been revealed, of course, should be investigated and brought before the appropriate authorities. And I'd invite you to go and have a look at what Max actually said, because he was making the point that during the course of that he was there to speak to the members, to the people who had attended the rally, not to defend any officials. Those are matters for the courts to work out. Is there talking to people who are now saying, well, if this has happened, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for the future? If it's this organisation now, will there be another organisation next? So I don't think you can conflate, with respect, I don't think you can conflate the things in the way that you just did.
Next question is from Ben Westcott.
Hi, Ben Westcott from Bloomberg. Thank you so much for your speech today, Adam. On higher education reforms, your Senator Marine Faruqi yesterday put out a very strongly worded statement in response to the government's caps to international student places. But Australia isn't alone in pursuing this policy. The UK, Canada and the Netherlands have all either enacted or considered similar policies, and it's been discussed for a very long time that the international student sector in Australia needs reforms. Can you see any way in which the Greens would support this policy, and do you agree that there does need to be some reform of the international student sector?
Let's say two things about this. Firstly, this is a migration policy dressed up as an education policy. It is Labor letting Peter Dutton lead them by the nose in a race to the bottom election where the question is who can beat up on migrants more, right? I have sat through Parliament over the last few weeks and seen them each trying to outdo each other about who is going to cut immigration to lower numbers, right? That is a race to the bottom election and campaign that we won't be part of. And you see this every time that people start doing it tough. But the political establishment doesn't turn around and take on the big corporations. They look for scapegoats, right? They look for scapegoats. And what Labor and Liberal are doing now are saying, we're going to attack migrants. Not the big corporations that are price gouging you, we're going to attack migrants, right? And even to the point where Labor is now saying universities are somehow have to get into the business of housing, linking migrants and housing and international students with the housing crisis. Right, this is a race to the bottom, migrant bashing debate that the Greens are not going to participate in the lead up to the election. The second point is that why have universities turned so heavily to international students? They've turned to international students because they've had their base funding cut over many, many years, right? And you go back to the Bradley Review, I think it was 2009, stand to be corrected on that. For decades now, government reviews have said universities are underfunded. And so they've turned to international students, right? Because governments have made them do it. And now governments are saying, well, we're not going to allow you to do that, but they're not increasing base funding of universities. And what you'll hear us saying very clearly as we go to the election is that we could have free education in this country if we make the big corporations and billionaires pay their fair share of tax, right? And universities could be properly funded. I am worried about what it's going to mean for universities, what it's going to mean for economies, especially in cities like mine that rely on universities doing well, because Labor doesn't have a plan to come in and support universities in another way. And as a result, I feel like this is going to have flow-on effects. This is going to have flow-on effects to non-international students, to local students as well, because you're pulling out a revenue stream from universities without replacing it with something else, all because Peter Dutton has started a debate about migration and you think this is an easy shot.
Thanks.
Next question. The next question is from Dan Jervis-Barty.
Dan Jervis-Barty from the West Australian. Thanks for your address, Mr Bandt. As you prepare for the prospect of a hung parliament after the next election, I'm interested in what lessons you can learn from the last time we were in that situation back in 2010. And if so, do you need to be more hard-lined? Do you need to set more red lines? And if that's the case, what might some of those red lines be beyond stopping coal and gas and putting dental into Medicare?
So, the last time there was a shared power parliament, we got dental into Medicare for kids, $13 billion for clean and renewable energy, and we changed the way Parliament operates to make it more democratic and accountable, right, amongst other reforms. Now, that delivered a huge win for the Australian people. As we go into the next Parliament, mentioned Western Australia, Sophie Greer's running in the seat in Perth. If 1 in 10 people change their votes there, then that seat could go green, right? And they could end up with someone who's in an incredibly strong position in Parliament to put forward these ideas. What are we going to be fighting for? Well, we're going to be fighting for big corporations and billionaires to pay their fair share of tax, to use it to fund services that will make people's lives better, right, to address the cost of living. And today we've announced a plan for getting dental into Medicare, and we'll announce more as we go on so that people go to the election having a very clear understanding about what the Greens will fight for during the course in the parliament like that. And of course we'll continue to push to stop the opening of new coal and gas mines. Like, that is a basic, bare essential. I think to come back to your point, the question is, what have the others learnt from it, right? We've learnt that when you have more voices in Parliament and more views represented, you get better outcomes that make people's lives better, right? You get things done that make people's lives better. And we're seeing that here in the ACT, for example. Like, you get things done that make people's lives better. The question is, are we prepared to work with them? Are they prepared to work with us? Right? There's going to have to be a question that is going to be asked of the others about what they will do when the Australian people deliver the parliament that they want. Will they respect it? We're up for pushing, but we will push hard. We will push hard to address the cost of living crisis and make the big corporations pay their fair share of tax so that people stop suffering.
Does pushing extend to threatening to withdraw confidence in supply?
Look, we'll be very clear as we go to the election about what approach that we will take. If we find ourselves in a shared power parliament, look, I think Labor is going to have to learn to play well with others, right, at the moment. Like, you're seeing the approach. Labor would rather work with the Liberals than with third voices across Parliament. I think it's them that is going to have to shift. We will go in there, like, our touchstone will be, can we get some change that makes everyday people's lives better by addressing the cost of living crisis, funded by making the big corporations, not everyday people, pay more tax? That'll be our touchstone.
Next question from Finn McHugh.
Finn McHugh at Capital Brief. Mr Bandt, thanks for your speech. Just tacking on from Dan's question, we're standing in the one jurisdiction in Australia where the Greens actually have been in government for a long time. You've had cabinet members here since 2012. It's pretty rich territory, but it's still racked with a lot of the problems that you've highlighted: a housing crisis, poverty's too high here. What lessons do you take from the experience here in the ACT? And in the event of a hung parliament, like your colleagues, would you ever consider demanding a cabinet spot?
Look, on the cabinet spots is not our priority. We want to get things done for people. I'm more interested in making change for people rather than being bound as part of a Labor cabinet to back more coal and gas mines. I mean, I think the federal Labor government, you see, is giving its full-throated support to opening new coal and gas and to letting big corporations off the hook. So our job will be there to push them. Right, to push them, and we'll take the concerns of people and we'll take it in there and fight for it. Here in the ACT, you've got 100% renewable energy, and you've got some of the lowest power bills in the country because the Greens have been in government, right? And now the Greens are pushing to make housing a human right here, so that no one goes without, and make it cheaper or free to be able to go and see the doctor. Like, these are the things you can get done when you put Greens into Parliament. And look, I'd say this, the flip side is that, like, if we keep voting for the same old two parties, we're going to get the same result, right? And at least we're having a crack. Like, we're going in there saying, like, let's take on these big corporations that seem to have Labor and Liberal in their pocket, stop prices of everything going up, and get a fairer deal for people. And we understand that it might not happen overnight. We might not be able to achieve everything we want in the next term of Parliament, but nothing changes if nothing changes, right? And we can't keep voting for the same old two parties and expecting a different result. And we're going to go in there and we're going to have a fight. You know, we're going to fight for things that will make a difference to people's lives. That's our priority.
The next question is from Brittany Levinson.
Thank you, Mr Bandt, for your speech. Brittany Levinson from the Canberra Times. My question is around the Medicare-backed dental plan that you've just announced. In their costing of that plan, the Parliamentary Budget Office says it's highly uncertain there would be a sufficient supply of qualified dentists to actually meet this proposal. How do the Greens plan to encourage more dentists into the industry and ensure that the workforce is there to support it?
Yeah, so free education would go a long way to encouraging people to come and get the kind of jobs that we're going to need in the future in order to have the skills that we need. And what the Parliamentary Budget Office has done, you'll see, is taper in their expectations of how it'll be picked up, like how the services will be picked up, which you'll note that is consistent with the modelling that was done, I think, in Canada when they looked at a similar scheme. So, but what it will mean is that when the scheme is operational, you'll be able to take that Medicare card in and use it at the dentist. And yep, it might take a couple of years to get up to the point where, we have issues at the moment with people being able to go and see their doctor, and that needs massive investment as well in order to lift it up. But the basic principle is you'll be able to walk in with your Medicare card, see it, and hopefully over those next couple of years, as the Parliamentary Budget Office said, it's going to get to the point where high utilisation rates and high availability rates.
Would there be any incentives for dentists going to regional communities where there's sometimes waits of 12 months for people to see a dentist?
Yeah, we're going to have a bit more to say about that as we go on during the course of the campaign, but I think introducing the capacity to get Medicare rebates and bring down the cost and therefore upping the potential patient numbers is going to be a big incentive for dentists to move into regional areas.
Thank you. And the last question for today is from Nick Stewart.
Super profits tax sounds like a great idea, but how do you get a company like Google to pay any tax, let alone tax on super profits? I mean, doesn't that simply encourage cost shifting and double Dutch Irish sandwiches and other complex structures like that to avoid paying tax?
Yeah, we will also have a bit more to say about multinational tax avoidance, about that kind of profit shifting between now and the election, and we've taken policies to previous elections about that as well. It is an issue. But I think the thing to do is to have a start, right? You've got to start. It is just wrong that 1 in 3 big corporations pays no tax in this country. And of course, the corporations will always try and find ways of avoiding paying tax. And we've got to be alive to that, resource the tax office to go after them, make sure we get the drafting right in the first place, close loopholes should they ever try and find any or create any. But so yes, we will have something more to say about multinational tax avoidance, but I think the basic principle is let's start by saying it's wrong that 1 in 3 big corporations in this country pays no tax, and that has to change.
Thank you. Being a journalist, I'll chuck in another question. Will you be happy to do an election address during the campaign sometime in the first part of next year?
Yep, count me in.
Great. Thank you very much. Now, before I ask you all to join me in thanking Adam Bandt, I'm going to present you with your membership card to the National Press Club. Thank you for being with us here today. It's great to hear from you and have this opportunity to ask you questions. Please join me in thanking Adam Bandt.